The great hall was silent. So silent that even the sound of a cloak shifting on the marble floor felt heavy. The young alien woman, Lyra, stood in the center with her head held high, though inside her heart was trembling. She had always believed herself untouchable, the daughter of a proud family, trained to speak with confidence and walk with strength. Yet now the Council of Elders stared at her with cold eyes, and their words cut deeper than any blade. "You will marry a human," the eldest elder declared. His voice was like stone breaking, firm and merciless. The sentence echoed across the chamber, and Lyra felt her blood run cold. She could not believe what she had just heard. Marry a human. To her, it was not only unthinkable, it was cruel. Lyra opened her mouth to protest. Her voice, usually sharp and commanding, shook as she tried to form words. "This is not justice," she whispered. Her eyes darted toward the circle of elders, searching for mercy. You cannot force me to such shame," but their faces did not soften. The council had judged her harshly. Lyra had spoken against their decisions in public, questioned their pride, and embarrassed them before other clans. For this, they needed a punishment that would remind everyone that no one, not even a noble daughter, could rise against the order. And so they had chosen the cruelest punishment they could imagine for her: a union with the species her people mocked as weak. Clumsy and unworthy, she felt the ground sway beneath her feet. Her people considered humans a primitive race, clever in small ways, but never truly powerful. To be tied to one by marriage was to fall from honor. It was exile wrapped in a ceremony, disgrace hidden beneath vows. Around her, whispers rose like smoke. Some faces in the crowd looked away in pity, while others smirked in satisfaction. They wanted to see her pride broken. They wanted to watch her kneel. Her father sat in silence at the edge of the hall. His face was carved with sorrow, but he said nothing. He had no power here. The council's word was final, and to resist further would bring ruin not only to her, but to her entire family. Lyra's chest tightened. She felt abandoned, cornered, betrayed. "You should be grateful," one of the younger elders spoke coldly. "The human chosen for you is simple, obedient, and strong enough to work. He will not harm you. He will not challenge you. What more do you need?" Grateful, Lyra thought bitterly. Grateful for chains. Grateful for humiliation. Every part of her screamed in rebellion. But she could not fight. She bowed her head slowly. Though every motion burned her pride, her voice, when it came, was like ash. "I will obey," she said, but inside, fire raged. She promised herself that she would never accept this punishment. Never allow herself to see this marriage as anything but a cage if they thought they had broken her spirit. They were wrong. She would keep her pride alive. Even if her heart turned to stone, the ceremony was announced for the next cycle. The council's scribes recorded the judgment, stamping their seals into wax as if sealing her fate forever. Lyra walked out of the hall with stiff steps. Every corner of the city seemed to stare at her as she passed. Every eye seemed to whisper, punished, disgraced, bound to a human. When she reached the outer steps, the sunlight blinded her. For a moment, she felt the weight of the sky pressing down. She wanted to scream, to tear the robes from her body, to show the world she would not bend. But her legs carried her forward, stiff and unyielding. Children played in the streets below, laughing without care. She envied them. She envied the way they could run freely. Untouched by shame, her own childhood seemed far away, like a dream she could never return to. She remembered when she thought the world would bow to her. Now the world had turned against her. That night, she sat alone in her chamber. Her hands trembled as she pressed them against the cold stone table. The words repeated in her mind like a cruel chant. "You will marry a human." She thought of the face of her future husband. Though she had not yet seen him, to her, he was not a man, but a shadow. A symbol of chains. She imagined him clumsy, dull, undeserving of even her gaze. The very thought made her chest ache with anger. Yet beneath her anger, a strange fear coiled. What if he looked at her with pity? What if he dared to touch her with hands that did not understand her worth? The thought sent shivers through her. She clenched her fists. "Never," she whispered. "I will never let him break me." But deep inside, a quiet voice whispered something she refused to hear. That sometimes punishment can carry hidden paths. That sometimes disgrace is not the end, but the beginning. She crushed the thought quickly. For now, she would only see this as betrayal, only punishment, nothing more. The morning of their meeting came faster than Lyra expected. She had spent sleepless nights thinking of ways to escape, ways to delay the punishment, but the council left her no choice. Guards escorted her to the edge of the city where the human lived. Their steps were steady, their expressions unreadable. As she walked between them, her pride was her only armor. The settlement was small, built from stone and wood. A place far simpler than the towering spires of her people. Lyra had always lived in shining halls, in places where light and glass touched the sky. Now she was being led into a village that looked to her like a cage of mud and ash. She wanted to sneer, but she bit her tongue. The council would call it disrespect, and more punishment would follow. When the door opened, she saw him. The human stood waiting, his hands behind his back. His hair was dark, his clothes plain. He was tall, broad-shouldered. But not intimidating, his face was quiet, steady. Like the earth after a storm, he did not bow, he did not smile. He only watched her with eyes that held no judgment. Lyra expected disgust to rise inside her instead. She felt something unfamiliar, strange, sharp unease. He did not look weak. Not in the way she had imagined. There was no clumsiness, no desperate reaching for her approval. Instead, his presence was calm, solid, almost heavy. It unsettled her more than if he had tried to flatter her. "This is your husband-to-be," one of the guards announced flatly. Lyra stiffened, refusing to look at the human again. She would not give him the honor of her attention, but even as she turned her head, she could feel his gaze resting on her, not harsh, not eager, simply steady, like a stone set in place. The guards left, the door closed, and silence filled the room for the first time. She was truly alone with him. Lyra folded her arms and lifted her chin. "Do not think this marriage means anything," she said coldly. "This is punishment, not choice. I will not respect you. I will not care for you." Her words were sharp, meant to wound. The human did not flinch. He only nodded slowly, as if he had already expected her anger. His voice, when he spoke, was deep but calm. "I did not choose this either," he said simply. There was no bitterness, no hate, only truth. That simple reply cut through her more than she wished to admit. She had imagined him eager, desperate for her. Instead, he sounded resigned, maybe even unwilling. For a moment, she almost asked why he had been chosen. But her pride sealed her lips. She would not show curiosity. Not yet. The day passed in silence. He went about his tasks without speaking to her. Chopping wood, carrying water, repairing the roof. She sat in the corner, her arms folded, watching him like a hawk. She told herself she was looking for weakness, but secretly she was puzzled. Every movement he made was steady, practiced. He worked with a kind of quiet strength she had never seen in her own people. By evening, he set food on the table. Bread, roots, and a small piece of meat. He did not serve her, he did not bow. He simply placed the dishes down and sat across from her. Lyra hesitated, expecting him to beg her to eat instead. He took a piece of bread and began quietly. She stared at him, anger rising. "You dare eat before I touch the food." She hissed. He looked up, his eyes calm. "You are free to eat or not," he said. "I will not command you." "And you do not command me." His words struck like thunder. Her people always demanded bows, titles, respect. Yet this human spoke to her as though she were equal, as though her bloodline meant nothing for the first time. Lyra felt something stir that was not anger. It was confusion. Maybe even a tiny crack in her certainty. She hated it. She hated the way his quiet voice unsettled her more than the harsh voices of the council. When night fell, he laid a blanket on the floor for himself. She noticed he had given her the bed without a word. She did not thank him. She told herself he was only doing it out of fear. But when she lay down, her mind would not rest. She kept replaying his words, his steady gaze, his silence. "This is punishment," she reminded herself. "He is beneath me. He is nothing." Yet the picture of him lifting heavy beams with quiet strength stayed with her. The sound of his calm voice echoed in her ears. She turned on her side, pressing her eyes shut. But sleep would not come easily in the stillness of the night. She realized something that filled her with dread. This human was not what she had expected, and that terrified her more than the punishment itself. Days passed, and Lyra refused to speak more than a few words to the human. She did not care to learn his name. In her mind, he was just a shadow, a symbol of her disgrace. She kept her distance, stayed silent, and watched him with cold eyes. She built a wall between them with her pride. Brick by brick, he, however, never argued, never complained. He worked quietly from morning until evening, fixing the home, chopping firewood, preparing food. He lived as if she wasn't there, and somehow that made her even angrier. Lyra expected him to try and win her over, to ask for kindness or favor, but he didn't. He never asked for her help, never looked at her with hunger or admiration. That silence, steady, strong, and strange, was the thing she could not understand. One morning, she watched him in the yard, lifting heavy stones with bare hands. His muscles moved with effort, sweat rolled down his arms. But he never made a sound. He didn't show off, didn't ask for attention. He simply did what needed to be done. She frowned, arms crossed. "You're doing it wrong," she said suddenly from the doorway. He glanced at her, then looked back at the stones. "Then show me the right way," he replied. Lyra stepped outside, her pride stiffening every movement. She didn't want to help, but she wouldn't let him think she knew nothing. She bent down to adjust one of the stones, showing him how to build the support properly. Their hands almost touched, and she pulled hers back sharply. Her heart thumped faster. She told herself it was disgust. Nothing more, he noticed, but said nothing instead. He followed her instructions carefully, and that made her feel even more out of control. Inside the house, she refused the food he made. Choosing instead to eat dried fruit she had packed long ago, she refused the bed he offered. Insisting on sleeping in the corner, she refused his kindness, his space, his presence. At night, she would sit by the window and stare at the stars, wondering if her family ever thought of her, wondering if the council watched from afar, pleased with her suffering. She imagined walking back into the council hall, proud and untouched, telling them the punishment had failed, that she remained unbroken. But each day, the human made that harder, not by force. Not by words, but by being exactly who he was. Calm and unshaken. One evening, it rained hard. The wind howled, lightning split the sky. A loud crack outside made Lyra jump, and the roof began to leak. He rushed outside to cover the break with cloth and wood. Lyra watched from the doorway, the rain soaking his shirt and hair. He moved quickly, with purpose, risking the storm to protect a home that wasn't even truly his. Why? She wondered bitterly. Why does he care so much? When he came back inside, dripping wet, he simply said, "The roof will hold for now," then sat quietly by the fire to dry his boots. She stared at him in disbelief. "You didn't have to do that," she said coldly. "Let it flood, for all I care." He looked at her then. Really looked. His eyes were tired, but not angry. "I live here too," he said softly, "even if it's punishment for both of us." Lyra opened her mouth, but nothing came out for the first time. She saw something behind his calm pain, maybe, or quiet endurance, and that shook her more than any storm later that night. When the fire was low and he had gone to sleep on the floor, she walked quietly across the room and covered him with the spare blanket. She did it quickly, almost angrily, as if to convince herself it didn't matter. But as she lay back down, her chest felt heavy. Not from guilt, but from confusion. Why was this man, this human, so hard to hate? Why was he nothing like what she had prepared for? She turned her face toward the wall, whispering to herself, "I will not fall for this. I will not forgive them, and I will not soften." But a voice inside her replied softly, "Then why are you already changing?" She closed her eyes, forcing the question away. She would hold her resistance. She promised, no matter how many days passed, no matter how steady his hands, no matter how quiet his voice. And yet, in the stillness of the dark, she realized something terrifying. Her wall was still up. Yes, but now there were cracks. Asterisk, the days grew colder, and the wind no longer whispered, it bit, sharp and angry. Lyra wrapped herself in her cloak and kept to the warmest part of the house. She watched the human from behind narrowed eyes. Always busy, always quiet, never pushing, never pulling. She hated how steady he was, how patient, how untouched by her silence. She hated it even more because deep down, part of her had stopped feeling angry, and that frightened her that morning. Frost clung to the windows like delicate claws. The fire had gone out during the night, and the house was cold. Her breath made small clouds in the air. The human was already awake, tending to the fire with frozen fingers. She sat up slowly, hugging her arms to her chest. "You should have woken me," she muttered, her voice rough from sleep. He glanced at her, then back at the fire. "You looked warm," he said simply. "Didn't want to disturb you." It was a strange feeling being considered, being seen not as an enemy or burden, but as someone who deserved peace. She didn't reply, only pulled her cloak tighter around her. That afternoon, while helping repair the storage shelf, one of the wooden boards slipped without thinking. He reached out to steady its hand in that moment. His hand brushed against hers. It was a small thing, barely a second, but the world seemed to pause. His hand was rough from labor, warm despite the cold. She pulled hers back instantly, her heart kicking like a trapped animal. Her eyes snapped to his, and for the first time, he looked shaken, not with fear, but something gentler, something human. "I'm sorry," he said softly, stepping back. "I didn't mean," but Lyra wasn't listening. Her hands still tingled, and she hated how alive it felt. She rubbed her palm against her cloak, as if trying to erase the warmth. Erase the moment. No touching, she snapped. But her voice lacked the sharp edge it once carried. He nodded, understood. He said quietly. Then he returned to the task like nothing happened. But everything had changed. Lyra couldn't stop thinking about it. Her mind returned to that touch again and again. Like a whisper in her thoughts, she told herself it meant nothing. It was an accident, a meaningless brush of skin. Yet her body remembered it, even when her pride told her to forget. That night, she stood by the window again. Her hand pressed to the cold glass. Outside, the moon hung low and golden, casting silver shadows on the snow-covered ground. She closed her eyes and remembered how his hand had felt solid. Real, alive. She hated how much she noticed things now. Like the way he always left the fire burning longer when she fell asleep late. Or how he placed her food closer to the warm side of the table. Or how he kept her cloak neatly folded. Even when she tossed it aside in anger, she wanted to stay cold. Like the snow outside, untouched, unmoved. But warmth kept finding its way in. Through cracks she couldn't seal fast enough. The next day, she dropped a wooden bowl. It cracked in two, and she cursed under her breath. Before she could bend down, he was already beside her. His hand moved toward hers again, and this time, she didn't pull away fast enough. Their fingers touched once more, longer than before. And something passed between them, man-spoken, raw, confusing. She looked up at him. And for a moment, neither of them said anything. Her eyes searched his, looking for a trap. For a smirk, for anything fake, but there was none. Just quiet understanding. Just patience. I can fix it, he said, his voice low. The bowl? She asked, her voice smaller than usual. No, he said, almost with a hint of a smile. Not everything breaks forever. She stood, heart pounding, confused and angry at herself for letting the silence grow comfortable. Later, as she lay in bed, she looked at her hand in the dark. She flexed her fingers slowly, remembering the way his hand felt against hers. How could something so simple shake her so much? This means nothing, she told herself again. He is still my punishment, but now she wasn't sure who she was trying to convince. Because deep inside, something had shifted. Not everything, not yet, but enough to feel the difference. Enough to know the wall she built might not stand forever, and it had all begun with a touch. Lyra could not sleep. Her eyes were closed. But her thoughts raced like fire through dry grass. That single touch, that moment her fingers met his, refused to leave her mind. It had lasted less than a breath. Yet somehow it had stirred something inside her she could not name. She told herself it meant nothing. She had been cold for so long, why should one small moment change anything? But her heart whispered doubts. And her body remembered warmth it had never known before. She woke up early, hoping a new day would bring back the armor she had worn so well. But even as she dressed, her hands trembled. She was angry with herself for feeling, for noticing, for thinking. The human was already outside, chopping firewood again. She stood at the door and watched him, the axe rising and falling in rhythm. He worked with focus, not looking at her, not waiting for her approval. That made it worse somehow. He should have been easy to hate. He was supposed to be weak, dull, eager to please. But he was none of those things. He was strong in silence, kind without asking, and strangely deeply hard to ignore. Lyra stepped out into the cold, determined to push these thoughts away. "You're wasting your energy," she said sharply. Nodding toward the large pile of wood, "There's enough for a week." He paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "I like to stay ahead," he replied. Calm as always, She frowned. Or maybe you just don't know when to stop. He looked at her then. Not with anger, not even with confusion, just quiet patience. Maybe, he said. But I'd rather keep moving than freeze. Something about those words hit her deeper than she expected. Was he talking about the cold? Or something else? She turned away quickly and walked to the garden, frozen and empty now. Her thoughts tangled like dead vines. Why did his words stay with her? Why did her heart beat faster when he looked at her that way, calm, steady, not demanding? Back inside, she caught her reflection in the water basin. She looked the same as always, sharp eyes, proud chin. But something behind those eyes had changed. She remembered the way she once walked through council halls with confidence. How she believed no one could touch her. Now, here in this simple wooden home, with a human who never raised his voice. Her world was shifting in quiet ways that evening. She sat across from him at the table. She didn't eat right away. Just watched him as he tore a piece of bread and dipped it in soup. He looked up. Something wrong with it? She blinked, caught off guard. No, she said quickly. It's fine. He nodded and kept eating. Not pressing, not prying. That frustrated her even more. How could he be so calm when her mind was full of noise? After dinner, he placed a blanket near the fire for himself as usual. She stood by the window, arms crossed. You act like none of this bothers you, she said suddenly, her voice edged with challenge. He looked up from the floor. What should I act like? I don't know, she snapped, angry, bitter, ashamed. Something, he paused, then said softly, I was all those things at first. But I can't change the council's decision. So I do what I can, and I try not to hate you. Lyra flinched. She hadn't expected such honesty. You don't hate me? She asked, voice quieter. He looked at the fire. I hated the idea of you before I met you. But you're not what I imagined either. Her chest tightened. And what did you imagine? He smiled faintly, without cruelty. Someone colder, crueler. Someone who wouldn't care if I froze outside. She turned away, not because his words hurt, but because they hit too close. She had been cold. She had tried to care as little as possible, she whispered. Maybe I'm not as strong as I thought. He didn't answer. But in the silence, she felt something settle between them, not peace. But not war either, something softer. Something waiting that night. Lyra didn't sleep in the corner. She didn't take the bed either. Instead, she sat quietly by the fire long after he had fallen asleep. Her thoughts wrapped around her like fog. Her pride told her to stay distant. But her heart, the part she had locked away, kept asking dangerous questions. Why does he make you feel seen? Why does his kindness unsettle you more than hate ever could? What would happen if you stopped resisting? She didn't have answers yet, only confusion. Only a hand that still remembered the first touch. Asterisk, the snow came heavier now. Blanketing the roof and sealing the world in white silence, Lyra stood by the window, watching flurries dance through the wind like restless spirits. Her breath fogged the glass, but her mind was far away. Lost in thoughts she no longer tried to silence. She told herself nothing had changed, that she still saw the human as punishment. But deep inside, she had stopped believing that. And the truth crept in with quiet steps. It wasn't the grand things, not dramatic words or powerful gestures. It was the small things, the way he folded her cloak when it slipped from her shoulders. The way he lit the fire a little earlier on colder mornings. The way he stepped aside silently to give her space without being told. He never asked for thanks, never looked at her with pleading eyes. He simply did, then moved on, and each time, It chipped at the walls she'd worked so hard to keep standing. One afternoon, Lyra slipped on the frozen path outside. Her feet flew out from under her, and before she hit the ground, strong hands caught her by the arms. The human steadied her, his fingers gripping her tightly, just long enough to keep her from falling. "You okay?" he asked, concern in his voice, but not panic. She looked up at him, heart racing, not from the fall, but from the closeness. His face was inches from hers, breath warm against the winter air. Her hands were on his chest, his hands on her arms. And for a terrifying second, it felt right. She quickly stepped back, brushing snow off her coat. "I'm fine," she said stiffly, avoiding his gaze. It was nothing, but it wasn't nothing. Not to her. She returned to the house, her face burning, and sat by the fire in silence. He came in after a while and didn't speak of it again. He didn't tease, didn't press, didn't even look at her strangely. That made it worse somehow, because she wanted him to look. And she hated that she did that evening. As they shared a quiet dinner, she noticed how he waited for her to take the first bite. He didn't do it, obviously no announcement, no bow, just waited, pretending to adjust his cup until she lifted her spoon. She paused, watching him out of the corner of her eye. "You always do that?" she asked, voice low. He looked up, confused for a moment, then realized what she meant. "I guess I do," he said, shrugging lightly. "Old habit. My mother used to say, it's respectful." She chewed slowly, then asked, "You miss her?" He nodded once, every day. She didn't reply, but her heart ached in a strange way. She had never asked him personal questions before. Now she found herself wanting to know more. That night, she couldn't sleep. Her mind wandered through memories, his hands catching her. The way he placed her cup where the fire's warmth would reach. The way he never raised his voice, even when she was cold to him. The next morning, she woke before him for the first time. She moved quietly through the kitchen, not entirely sure what she was doing. Her hands were awkward with the tools, but she remembered enough from her training to prepare simple food. When he stepped into the room, eyes still heavy with sleep, he froze at the sight of her placing 2 bowls on the table. "You cooked?" he asked, clearly surprised. "Don't get used to it," she muttered. Sitting down, "I was awake. That's all." He gave a soft laugh, the sound low and warm. "Thank you," he said, not just for the food, but for something else, something deeper. They ate in silence, but the air felt different. Lighter somehow. She still didn't smile, but her eyes were softer. She didn't pull away when their hands brushed as they reached for the same cup. Later, while folding her cloak, he found a small tear near the edge. He didn't tell her, just sat down by the fire and began to stitch it closed. His hands moved slowly, carefully, treating the cloth like something precious. Lyra noticed, and for the first time, her throat tightened. Why did he do these things? Why did he care when he had every reason not to? That night, she stared at him as he slept on the floor near the hearth. His face was peaceful, the firelight casting soft shadows across his jaw. He looked safe, and for the first time since the punishment was announced, Lyra no longer felt like a prisoner. She didn't understand what she felt. Not fully, not yet. But she knew one thing: the gestures may have been small, but their weight was growing inside her, and she wasn't sure if she wanted them to stop. The days moved slowly, but something inside Lyra was shifting faster than she could control. She still woke each morning in the same wooden house, still sat by the same fire, still heard the soft steps of the human as he moved through their space. But the air around her felt different now, warmer somehow, she no longer avoided his eyes. In fact, she often found herself watching him when he worked with his hands, when he carried buckets of water through the snow, when he sat silently by the fire with his thoughts hidden behind calm eyes. She told herself she was only observing, that she was just curious, but deep inside, she knew. It wasn't curiosity anymore, it was care. Small things began to matter to her. She noticed when he skipped a meal, when his hands were raw from the cold, when he came inside shivering and said nothing, one morning without a word. She placed her thicker gloves on the table before he left. She didn't look at him, didn't explain, just left them there and returned to her tea. He saw them, paused, and then picked them up with quiet understanding. "Thank you," he said gently, and she nodded once without turning. But her lips pressed tightly together, holding back the strange warmth rising in her chest. Another time, he came home with a cut on his arm. Nothing deep, but bleeding. She rushed to him before she could think. Grabbing cloth and water, "Why didn't you say anything?" she asked, more upset than she expected. He blinked at her, surprised. "Didn't seem important." "Well, it is," she said firmly. Then cleaned the wound with hands that trembled not from fear, but from something else, something new. He watched her as she worked, silent, but his eyes held something soft, something full of respect. That night, as they shared a quiet dinner, he looked at her for a long moment. "You've changed," he said. She froze, her spoon halfway to her mouth. "What do you mean?" "You're warmer now," he replied. "You don't hide it, but it's there." She lowered her spoon, unsure how to respond. "Maybe I'm just tired of being cold," she whispered. Not meeting his gaze, he didn't push, didn't ask more. He only nodded. And that silence between them said more than words ever could. Lyra began to talk more. Not much, not all at once, but small stories about her childhood, her planet's moons, the games she played as a child in the palace gardens. He listened, truly listened, as if her voice mattered, as if her memories were treasures worth keeping. In return, he shared little things, how his father taught him to build shelter from broken parts, how his sister used to braid his hair when they were small, how he once got lost in the woods and found his way back by following the stars. And Lyra found herself laughing, really laughing, for the first time since her exile. One night, a storm rolled in, fierce and howling, shaking the windows and roaring through the chimney. Lyra flinched at a loud crash, and he reached for her hand, not thinking, just instinct. She let him hold it, didn't pull away. His hand was warm, steady, and something about it grounded her like nothing else. She gripped his fingers tighter. Her eyes closed, and for the first time, she didn't feel lost. They sat like that for a long time, not speaking, just holding hands as the storm raged outside. When the silence returned, she looked at him through the dim firelight. "I don't think this is a punishment anymore," she said softly. He smiled. "Just a little. Neither do I." Lyra didn't sleep in the corner that night. She didn't take the bed either. She pulled a blanket near the hearth beside him, close enough to feel the heat of the fire. And of him, she lay on her side, her face toward his, eyes wide open in the dark. "You don't speak much," she whispered. "I only speak when it matters," he said. "And what matters now?" She asked, voice low. He looked at her gently. "That you're here," her breath caught. And for the first time, she allowed herself to smile. Not out of pride, not to hide, but because she meant it. The woman who once stood before the alien council with fire in her voice and hate in her heart now lay beside a human, and felt peace. She didn't know what the future held, didn't know how her people would react. But she no longer cared. Something inside her had changed. Quietly, fully, she wasn't surviving anymore. She was beginning to live. The snow had begun to melt, slowly, quietly. It dripped from rooftops and trees, leaving behind patches of green and earth. The wind no longer bit, it whispered instead. As if tired from all its shouting, Lyra stood outside the house. Breathing in the cold morning air, her eyes followed a group of birds flying across the sky. Free and light, something inside her felt the same. The house behind her was still, but no longer silent. It carried warmth, no fire, of soft laughter, of two lives slowly learning to move in rhythm. She heard his footsteps approach and didn't turn immediately. She waited, let herself feel the way her heart beat faster when he was near. "You're up early," he said gently, stepping beside her. "I wanted to see the sky," she replied. Her voice calm. "It's different now," he nodded. "Everything feels different." They stood side by side for a while. Not needing to say more, the silence between them had changed. It was no longer a wall, but a blanket, soft and shared. Lyra looked at him from the corner of her eye. "Do you remember the first time we met?" He gave a quiet smile. "How could I forget? You told me not to speak, not to hope, not to touch, and you listened," she said, almost laughing. "That was the most frustrating part," he chuckled softly. "Well, you were terrifying," she rolled her eyes. But her smile lingered. "I was angry. I thought this was the end of my freedom. And now?" he asked, his tone gentle, curious. She looked down at her hands. "Now bare? No longer clenched in fists. Now I wonder if the council gave me a gift and called it punishment." He said nothing. But his hand reached out, slowly, respectfully. And when their fingers met, she didn't flinch. She held on, not with fear, but with trust. Later that day, they were summoned. A messenger from the council had arrived, sharp and formal. His voice was cold as he delivered the words. "The marriage period is complete. You are free to separate. If either of you wishes." Lyra stood tall, her chin high, but her heart was steady. This was the moment she had waited for at the beginning, the chance to walk away. To reclaim her pride, the messenger looked between them. "What is your decision?" There was a pause, just long enough to feel the weight of everything they had been through. Then Lyra spoke, her voice clear. "There is no separation." The messenger blinked, surprised. "You choose to remain." "I was sent here to be broken," she said, turning to look at the human. "But I found something worth building instead." The messenger turned to the human, who simply nodded. "I stay," he said. There were no ceremonies, no speeches, no celebrations. Only quiet acceptance as the messenger left. But for Lyra, it felt like a beginning. Not an ending. That evening, they sat by the fire. Her head resting lightly on his shoulder. Her fingers played with the hem of his sleeve. Not out of boredom, but comfort. "Did you ever think it would come to this?" she asked softly. "No," he admitted. "But I hoped." She closed her eyes, letting his warmth settle around her. "Marriage always sounded like a chain to me. Like being trapped in someone else's life. And now," he whispered. She smiled against his arm. "Now it feels like choosing someone to walk beside. Not in front, not behind, just together." Outside, the snow continued to melt. The world was waking again. So was she, in her heart. There were still old pieces, fragments of anger, pride, fear, but they no longer ruled her. They were simply part of the story, not the end of it. She had once seen this marriage as a sentence, a punishment, a fall from grace. But now, sitting beside the man who had never demanded her heart, only waited for it, she understood something she never did before. Love wasn't loud. It wasn't a storm or a fire. Sometimes it was a quiet room, a warm meal, a hand that didn't let go. Sometimes love was found in the small moments, and in the people who never walked away. And marriage. Marriage was not the prison she feared. It had become the door she had never dared open until now.